Hi there, I'm Chris for TTCombat and welcome to what I'm going to call the Tippy Test Lab, where I'm going to try something out so you don't need to spend your time on it, you just get to know what the result is and then you can recreate that yourself. First I'm going to be taking a look at the TTCombat Candy Coat set. So these are candy inks, or candy paints, and you get 10 of them in this set that I bought myself. A range of colours, so you've got a couple of yellows, a couple of reds, a red, a pink, a couple of blues, a couple of greens, orange and black. And they are made for airbrushes, but it does also say on the box that they can be used by brush as well. So I'm going to test out these paints, see what the difference is between running it through an airbrush and running it through a traditional brush. And to do that, I've got some spare weapons from my bits box, and just to keep it clear which ones are going to be what, these ones are going to be with the airbrush, these ones are going to be done with traditional brush, so very clear weapons which one's going to be what. Now, candy paints are best applied over metallics, so to do that, to get these ready, I'm going to use some TTCombat metallics, and I'm just going to quickly blast these weapons with that, and that's gonna get them ready to go, and then we can make a start on with the candy paints. These candy paints go straight through the airbrush without needing thinned. Candy paints work like a filter over metallic paints, giving a glazed tint effect and gives it a candy gem finish thanks to the gloss they have. The airbrush applies thin layers of paints, so allow them to dry before applying the next layers, developing the colour further. On these spare weapons I applied a metallic base with a highlight and a shadow to see how they affect the candy paint, in particular how the blend between the two look. The colour range in the Candy Coat set gives a nice selection of colours, and since they make for great gem effects, all of the main treasures can be covered, including gold, emeralds, rubies and sapphires. In taking my journey to find the best way to use coloured metallics, Candy Coats allows me to create my own coloured metallics and essentially glaze my way through the shades. With candy paints not being all that prominent in the wargaming space, it could be quite new for a lot of gamers, whereas in the Gundam and custom car scenes, may be a bit more used to working with them. So it's worth saying with these paints, you do have to put a bit more prep work before you get down to the colour. Pre-shading using metallics, adding highlights and ensuring you have a smooth finish is key, because candy paints will bring up imperfections and make fixing issues difficult. It adds extra steps to your painting routine, and there is a drying and curing time to take into account, particularly if you are masking areas. Off camera, I gave these all a second coat of candy paint to get better coverage. I found that one coat gives a nice filter, two coats gives a solid colour, and further coats would develop deeper colours thanks to how the candy paints function. I don't show airbrushing much on this channel, so here's a glimpse at my airbrushing stuff. I have a paint booth with an extractor built into it, but I also wear a respirator to prevent breathing in any particles that the extractor didn't pick up. The headphones are just because I was listening to a podcast, so I didn't have to listen to the extractor fan for hours. Here I set up a base with a clear change from light and dark metallics. I had some black lines and some white lines. This experiment was devised after watching some car customization videos where the painter applies a design over a metallic base and before the candy coat. This also gives me a look at how the paints will look over non-metallic paints. I used a lighter and darker colour on the base, which lets me see how both ends of brightness look. Citrine yellow and tourmaline pink also make for great colours to use if you want to do a synthwave paint scheme. I'll let this dry and show you the result later. I prepared another spare weapon for another test, using gold as a base and applying ruby red over it. I wanted to compare how it looks to ruby red applied over silver. Again, this uses a shadow and a highlight gold, same as I did for the silver. We'll compare it later. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the airbrush stuff away, and I'm going to be using these Ghost Reapers to do the candy paints being brushed on as opposed to the airbrush, and then we'll be able to compare finishes with them. So with the airbrush ones, I did do a second coat on them just to get a nice full colour of them, and I'll be seeing what these look like with one coat and then applying a second if I think a second coat would be good. But I mean, you'll see it on the camera anyway, what it looks like with one. Moving over to traditional brushes to paint these examples, I noticed very quickly that they react different to the airbrush applied paints, and that different paints would react different from each other. I would later learn that applying the candy paint thicker would give an effect closer to the airbrush, but here it actually gave me ideas for using them, which would also come in handy later. However, like with the airbrush applied examples, I gave these ones 2 coats. One of the issues I found with this example was how the paint seemed to bead up as the paint dried. Now this could be that I didn't mix them enough, or it could just be how the candy medium reacts while drying when it's applied thin. And when applied thicker, I didn't have this problem, but I thought it was worth mentioning, so keep this in mind. Aragonite Orange has a rich amber effect when applied with the airbrush. When applied with a brush, it gives the metal an aged, grimy look, which I think would look great for Necrons or ancient armour and weapons on skeletons. Onyx Black gives the metal a nice lacquered look when done with an airbrush. When applied with a brush, it reacts like a wash but maintains a gloss on the metal after it has settled the colour into the recesses, and I really like this and will use this soon. Sphalerite Yellow has a rich gold look through the airbrush, but with the brush application it is given a really nice tint like a pale gold. A few more coats would have really helped this one though. On the darker areas, the yellow candy gives an old gold look, which would give treasure piles a bit of colour variety. Citrine Yellow creates a bright lemon yellow gold, and when applied with the brush, I prefer this yellow. The tinted silver gives us a delicate shade of yellow gold, like an antique gold. Idocross Green is a lovely olive green with a glassy finish. Over silver, it gives an excellent jewel effect, which would work really nice for jade items, or for glow and magical items. With a brush, I found it would need a lot more layers than some of the others, but with 2 thin coats, it has a very subtle tint. Sapphire Blue gives a very rich and deep blue, making a great jewel-like finish. With the brush, the blue tint looks like how raw cobalt ore has that blue shimmer. Glazing a few more layers with a brush would build a really nice cobalt steel look, particularly over a dark silver.
Ruby Red has a deep candy apple red look with a gemstone depth. It gives a really nice red tint when applied with a brush. Using high contrast and silver highlights and shadows would make amazing gemstone effects, particularly if you wanted to make a flawless cut ruby. But I think it really comes into its own when applied over gold. The gold adds a real richness to the colour, and I think it would look great for Blood Angel Terminators or Horus Heresy Blood Angels. Tourmaline Pink gives a bright poppy bubblegum pink, which would look amazing for neon effects, or like I suggested with the base example, a synthwave look. When applied with a brush, it really needs more coats, but the pink tint gives a shibushi effect, which is a copper silver alloy used in Japanese ornate metalwork. Topaz Blue is a lighter blue with a slight aquatic look. Through the airbrush, it gives us a fantastic bold colour. The tint we get with the brush is very subtle, and I would need a few more coats really. Emerald Green is a classic jewel tone, deep, richly coloured and glows so well. This would look great used on lights and screens, and when applied with a brush, it gives an otherworldly green tint which would look amazing for magic weapons or power weapons. I'd actually like to use this on some of my Rashar monsters in Carnival.
So, got the airbrush stuff back out because we'll be moving on to doing the IROC Z, which is a sports car. I've masked off the windows, the front grille bit. I think I'll add a little bit more into there after this recording here. I've also masked off the tyres. I'm thinking about trying to get a little bit more contrast from the shade colour, so that'll be using tungsten steel. That's what I used on the weapons before when I was testing them. But I think I'll use Supernova Chrome as the main metal colour. It's a very bright standout metal, and I think that contrast between those two will help with the candy paint really stand out. Once I've got the metallics on there, I'm thinking I'm going to be doing a stripe offset down one side and do that as a different colour. So I'll mask that off, but to create like a little bit of depth on it, I've been watching some candy coat painting car videos to kind of get some ideas for it, and there's a really nice effect where they add like a drop shadow to create some like overlapping designs. So I'm thinking of maybe adding that onto that stripe. And there's a little section on this along the sides that I've seen on like actual examples of the IROC Z, and it's like a black stripe on there. So I want to do something with that as well. So I'll probably end up masking that off and kind of doing something through there. But we'll come to that when we get to that. Yeah, so I'm going to get that done and then I'll be back.
I masked off areas I didn't want blue, like the door handles, lights and front grille. In my airbrush I mix a few drops of onyx black and sapphire blue, give it a stir and begin to spray either side of the stripe. This is going to give us a nice deep blue to work as a drop shadow for the stripe. I apply a few coats until I'm happy with it. Once dry, I use just sapphire blue and I spray the full car. Try and keep a nice even spray and keep the airbrush moving to keep from flooding the model with paint. Allow it to dry before applying the next coat. You'll notice that when sprayed over the drop shadow colour, it maintains that deep midnight blue, which is perfect. When we spray the next coat, we use the same rules. Keep the airbrush moving and keep an even coverage. Make sure you spray from all angles so we get full coverage and don't allow any silver to show. That glossy finish looks amazing. Apply as many coats as you want until you get the depth you want. This was after 3 coats and I love it. I allowed it to dry and cure overnight and came back to it the following day. I removed the masking tape from the stripe and applied more either side of it. I cleaned up any paint that managed to seep under it using silver paint and let it dry before spraying with sphalerite yellow. This was a nerve-wracking step because I was unable to see how it looked with the blue beside it, but stick with it and apply a few coats until you have a depth you like. After the stripe has dried, carefully remove the masking tape. I ended up not being satisfied with the stripe, so I added a black stripe to the border between the yellow and blue, then used sapphire blue to give it a candy finish that blended with the drop shadow. I also removed the rest of the masking tape on the handles, lights, windows, wheel and grills. I brushed on some onyx black to the lights and grille to give it some depth, and I painted the license plate to have Vermont plates. Once the onyx black dried, I added a highlight of silver to the lights to emphasise the bulbs, and on the rear lights it would give them a brighter spot when I apply the candy paints in thick layers, which gives a great finish. Now I just have the glass to paint and the wheels to finish, and this car is ready to varnish and hit the table with a sweet candy paint job.